Good evening and welcome to the Melrose School Committee special meeting this evening. And I have the privilege right now at about 6:30 to call the roll. Mr. O'Connell.
Here.
Mayor Broder. Ms. DeSelm.
Here.
Ms. McAndrew.
Here.
Ms. Rosie Thomas.
Here.
Ms. Withy.
Here.
And I am here. There are 6 of us here, so I do declare a quorum. And I would like to, again, welcome everyone and invite us all to stand as we are able to say the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And just to note that this meeting this evening is being recorded and is being televised live by our friends at MMTV. This evening, it is our privilege to welcome our 3rd finalist candidate for the position of Superintendent, Dr. John Buckey. Dr. Buckey, the way we'd like to frame this evening is we'll begin with a couple minutes of opening remarks. We'll go around the room and ask you some questions and invite you to share some of your thoughts and opinions with us. And then we'll have a couple of minutes for closing remarks, and we'll plan to wrap up about 7:30.
Excellent.
So with that, if you'd like to share some opening remarks, that would be great. Thank you.
I just want to say that I count it a privilege to be in consideration for your superintendent of schools. As you saw in my personal statement, I said the selection of the superintendent of schools is perhaps one of the most consequential decisions that a community makes, so I am humbled by your consideration. By way of a little bit of background, and I apologize to those of you that might be hearing this for the 3rd or 4th time, John Buckey, born and reared in Newcomerstown, Ohio. Likely that you've not heard of it, but it is the home of Cy Young and Woody Hayes. I'm a product of public education, which I believe in strongly. Graduated in a class of 78 students. Went on to Asbury College in Wilmore, Kentucky. Started out as a broadcast journalism major because people said, with a voice like that, you'll be on the evening news. I thought that I would spend 4 years at Asbury College and then cross the street to Asbury Theological Seminary to become a United Methodist minister. Life took a different turn. I changed my major to education the 2nd semester of my freshman year because in my heart I knew that I always wanted to be a teacher. I had an excellent Spanish teacher in high school, so I did a dual major in Spanish and secondary education. I became a Spanish teacher in a world language department chair at the Lexington School in Lexington, Kentucky. For 3 years, and then I went to the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I got a master's in administration, planning, and social policy. After that year, I returned to Ohio and became a dean of students at an all-girls boarding school. If that sounds like a terrible decision, it was. At the end of that year, I would have been one of 2 remaining administrators, me as the dean of students and the director of the equestrian center. I thought the handwriting was on the wall in terms of career moves, so I headed back east and became assistant principal at Littleton High School. I was actually hired and interviewed for that job at a Pizzeria Uno's in Kenmore Square. The principal at the time, Bob DeSaulniers, who remains a lifelong friend, colleague, and mentor to me, shared that he had 4 years until he retired and wanted to do some succession planning. And so he provided opportunities for me as a young administrator to be a co-principal with him. During that time, I met my husband, who was a police officer on Nantucket, and so we had to make the decision, will I move to Nantucket, or will he come to America, as people on the island say? So he had an opportunity to interview in Harwich for a law enforcement job, and he went to the interview, and I asked after, how did your interview go? And he said, pretty well. They asked me why I wanted to be a police officer in Harwich. I said, pretty standard interview question, and what was your answer? I said, I don't know, it's like any other Cape Town. I said, looks like I'm moving to Nantucket. And I did, and was the high school principal there for 12 years. But in my heart, I've always wanted to be a superintendent of schools on Nantucket. There's a singular opportunity for that. So I applied in America, as they say, and had the privilege of being superintendent of schools for the last 3 years for the Marblehead Public Schools. The committee that hired me in Marblehead of January 2020 had a series of values, priorities, directives that I was hired to do, and then something called COVID hit. And superintendents, whether seasoned or in their first year, were faced with splitting communities in person or remote, masks or no masks, hybrid. And so the committee that I signed a separation agreement with this summer is not the committee that hired me in 2020. Elections have consequences, and the election this summer was on June 21st. And 2 weeks later, we were talking about separation. So there were 2 committee members with whom I never really had the opportunity to work. I had 2 years left on my contract. I could have remained, but in the best interest of the district, I felt that it was not serving students, staff, and families well for the school committee and the superintendent to have competing values and priorities. And so that is what brings me to Melrose this evening, in part through a conversation I had with a colleague of mine in the North Shore Superintendent's Roundtable, a name that may resonate with some of you. Brent Conway called me this summer to offer support and encouragement as life was evolving or devolving, as one might think, in Marblehead. And he said, John, I've seen you lead the North Shore Superintendents, and he said, I spent a long time in Melrose. I think that you should consider Melrose. I think your leadership style and the district would fit nicely, and I have been grateful for that conversation with Brent Conway, because as I've studied your district and watched your school committee meetings, spoiler alert, that's what I do for fun. I watch Melrose school committee meetings. Who needs Netflix when you have MMTV? I've learned a good deal about the district and seen how the school committee works together and shares the leadership. And looking at your strategic plan, where 4 of the initiatives talk about personal or personalized learning. And so all the homework that I did leading up to today bore out in the visit. And that's exactly what a candidate wants to see and feel, that what is on paper is the lived experience for students, staff, and families in the district. There are some opportunities ahead, challenges, but people have been very candid about those today, and that's refreshing for me as a candidate. So I appreciate your consideration, and by way of introduction.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. And I will ask the first question. Can you tell us about your core values and how you embody them in your work?
Yeah, I think my core values are empathy, commitment, community, and transparency. Unfortunately, transparency seems to have become a weaponized word these days, but I think the more that people, quote unquote, see the sausage being made, the more that they can come to value and understand what is happening. When I think of the budget here in Melrose, you need commitment and community and understanding, and I think those values will help people to understand why the issues that exist with the budget are there and how together we can collaborate to overcome them.
Thank you. Ms. McAndrew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Buckey, and for spending the day in the district and being part of this process. We all really appreciate it. My question is about problem solving and your approach to problem solving. I don't have to tell you that there is no shortage of challenges facing superintendents in Massachusetts and beyond. I'm sure you're familiar with many and all of them: hiring and retaining diverse and well-supported staff, providing an excellent and inclusive education for all learners, managing enrollment growth, something we're dealing with here, and of course dealing with skyrocketing costs, particularly around transportation and other areas. That's just a few. But I'm interested in your approach to problem solving and how you creatively go at problems. So I'm wondering if you could please offer a few concrete examples of when you've been presented with a tough problem or challenge and how you've brought creative approaches to solving those.
Thank you. I think I've said several times today that the smartest person in the room is the room. As superintendent, I would not come in professing to know how to address all the challenges. When I was in Marblehead, there were no shortage of challenges presented by COVID, and I think one that comes to mind when we returned to in-person instruction was recess. And we had 2 recesses a day, but weren't meeting our time on learning requirement. And so I said, well, we should eliminate one of the recesses so that we can get to literacy instruction and math instruction. Whoa, recess gate. Taking recess away was akin to canceling Christmas or to saying that we were going to lock students up. And so I think that the challenge was in how the change was communicated, that in terms of time on learning requirement, we needed to make that change in order to be in compliance. What we failed to do was to articulate the reasons why and how we would incorporate movement breaks in a working snack and have a win block in the schedule in that students weren't going to be now sitting for 6 hours a day. And we did not get out ahead of that communication. So what I did was put together a recess task force and brought parents and teachers in to work with the assistant superintendent for teaching and learning to look at recess and to look at the schedule. Were there opportunities, rather than having a 20-minute recess in the morning and a 15-minute recess in the afternoon, were there ways of scheduling so that we could meet the time on learning requirement? Unfortunately, the end result was no, there wasn't, without extending the school day. So extending the school day has pretty significant budget implications. And so being able to communicate that, even the most staunch recess supporters were able to understand, okay, it is in the schedule of our school day. And we polled numerous schools along the North Shore. How many recesses do you have? How long is your school day? And so we are in collective bargaining in Marblehead this year, and I can see that being a significant driver to look at how the elementary school schedule works in order to meet the time on learning requirement.
Thank you.
Ms. Withey.
Great, thank you. I also want to echo my colleagues' just appreciation for you being here today. I know it's been a long day. You started at 8:30. You've met with a lot of different folks, and I just really appreciate the moments that we've gotten to get to know you too during that time. With that being said, I'd love for you to think to what you've learned thus far and share with us what would be your top 3 priorities for Melrose based on what you've learned. And then if you have time, we'd love for you to also explain how you plan to address that top priority that you name.
Well, I think through the research that I did into the district bore out what I could have anticipated would be the top 3 challenges, the budget being the most prominent among the challenges, space issues, and culture. I think you had very public negotiations with the Melrose Education Association last year, or your Teachers Association, and I might have anticipated that there are pockets of residual ill will, bad feelings, a sense with administration versus the rank and file. And so I would want to address the culture issue. Culture, according to Torrance Deal, is how we do things here. I can't presume to know how we do things in Melrose without being in the district. And so I would have an entry plan in the first 90 days to work with constituents and stakeholder groups to ask, what are the strengths of the Melrose Public Schools? Where are our opportunities? Are there any things that a new superintendent coming in should stay away from? And then use that data to produce an entry plan and report that out to the school committee and to address those challenges. Budget, I'm assuming there might be another budget question coming, but your 95, when I look at municipal budgets, there are two things: reliance on free cash, and as Ms. DeSelm has said, there's no, cash is not free, and new growth. And with Melrose being 95, 96% residential, your opportunities for new growth are limited. And so how is it that we address what is clearly a structural deficit in the school department budget, our reliance on free cash, and be able to clearly articulate what does it cost to educate a Melrose student? And that's not clear, as it is in many communities, not clear, because your custodians and your nurses are, I believe, on the city side of the ledger, and you charge athletic user fees. And so a clear sense, and then make that case to the community. You passed an override 4 years ago, but 2 years prior to that, you didn't. And so what lessons were learned in the interim 2 years? How was it presented? And what can we do to present to the community what it costs to educate a Melrose student and how we fund that? And that is a huge communications campaign, marketing campaign, making sure that people understand, but you have clearly been able to do that in the past.
Thank you.
Ms. DeSelm.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I also echo our colleagues. Thank you for being here tonight and spending the day with us in Melrose. I want to ask you to expand a little bit on one of your three objectives, that being culture.
Yep.
What have you done in the past, and what can you as superintendent do in the future to promote educator morale and a respectful work environment? And what kinds of things, innovative things, do you think you could bring to Melrose?
Yep. I can speak to some of the work that I did in Marblehead. I met with the union every week, the leadership of the union, whether there was an issue on the table or not. I was highly visible. In my evaluation last year, I was able to cite that I was in 350 different classroom visits. I attend all student events, whether it's the National French Honor Society, it's the robotics competition. There was a parent in Marblehead that joked Dr. Buckey would show up at the opening of an envelope. And I think that that creates credibility and builds trust to be out in classrooms and to be supporting teachers. There's nothing more gratifying than walking through the Stop and Shop and having a fourth grader say, "That's Dr. Buckey, he was in my classroom today." So, and those informal opportunities for educators to interact and to receive feedback from the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, from teaching and learning, the building principal. We don't do a lot of praise in education, and I think that as I've heard today, some educators feel like every Melrose educator does a job and a half, and that they are so short-staffed in areas that they feel they're burning the candle at both ends. Informal things that I've done at the beginning of every year, beginning of my first year, I bought everyone a long-sleeve T-shirt in the district that said Marblehead Pride, went with the theme, same shirt, same team. The next year, bought everyone a shirt, but engaged the educators in designing that, made it a design competition. And they were so appreciative of just a small gesture that every Friday they could wear a shirt and they would see me as superintendent and say, same shirt, same team. And so building that sense of community and teamwork when you have to face difficult decisions helps. And trust takes a long time to build and is destroyed in an instant. And so being available, accessible, I do a superintendent coffee once a month. I regularly eat lunch in the cafeteria, in part because I don't cook, but I enjoy being with students, host student lunches to hear from different constituent groups, have lunch with our METGO students to get a sense of their experience, and just genuinely enjoying the work. They say if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life, and that's how I feel as a superintendent. And this last 4 months has been very hard because I haven't been doing that work, and so I look forward to enjoying that again.
Thank you.
Ms. Rosie Thomas.
Great to have you here. My question is kind of three parts.
Who doesn't love a three-part question?
I know. I know. I just want to see if we can muddle you up a little bit. How do you know good instruction when you see it? How do you know when you see poor instruction? And how do you offer feedback formally and informally? And I can repeat that if you want me to, but I think you've got it.
Good instruction, I think, is seen when students are engaged and learning and constructing knowledge. It's not stand and deliver, which many of us were probably the proud recipients of. It's giving students an opportunity to construct knowledge on their own, to see them being curious in the classroom. Poor instruction is in the eye of the beholder, perhaps, but is when students are sitting passively, being asked to recite rote memorization and don't understand what it is they're being asked to do. One of the first things I do every time I go for a classroom visit is to sit down with a student and say, what are you working on? And good instruction, the student's able to tell you right away what they're working on, but more importantly, why they are doing it. Poor instruction would fall under, I don't know, the teacher's making me do it. And so, informally, classroom walkthroughs is an opportunity to engage, but I also support our administrators in using the teacher evaluation rubric and providing professional development for principals and calibrating what we see. Part of all of my instructional walkthroughs with building principals and the assistant superintendent for teaching and learning is a debrief at the end to say, what did you see? And it's interesting how 3 people or 4 people can see 3 or 4 different things or have a different take on what they saw. And so that is providing professional development for our leaders, who then in turn can provide constructive feedback to our educators. An exercise I did with the administrative team was using TeachPoint. I don't know if you use TeachPoint here, but to offer feedback as they do informal walkthroughs. And I think that that's important because walking through and providing no feedback, positive or negative, is not helpful. Or just providing rote praise is not helpful, but opportunities for growth. And to provide that to teachers, you need to provide that professional development to your administrative team. And it's ongoing learning for us all because, you can watch a Research for Better Teaching video of a lesson and 5 people could say, have 5 different to say, that was really good instruction, and somebody else say, that was really poor instruction. So it's professional development.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Did I get all 3 parts?
Yes.
Good answer.
Mayor Broder.
Doctor, it's good to see you. My question is about, seems to be amplifying, college and career readiness. We have 4,000 kids, roughly, getting towards 300 in our graduating class. Everyone's got a little bit of a different take on what a good outcome should be. There are folks who don't believe or don't think it's important to stress college and career readiness. Others, myself included, think that is a very important metric when you're judging whether or not we had a good year, whether or not we've served the wide range of interests among our students. So I'm very interested in getting your thoughts on college and career readiness as a value in the Melrose Public Schools.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, one that I can speak to from personal experience. If you had asked me when I was in Littleton about philosophy of education, I would say everybody should go to college. We should be preparing every student to go to college, whether they intend to go to college or not. They should be in college preparatory curricula. My stepson then had a miserable middle school experience. He was not an academic, and he learned how to push teachers' buttons, and they learned to respond when he pushed those buttons. And as a freshman, he enrolled in Upper Cape Tech, and the light went on. And the academic experience changed. He couldn't wait to go to school in the morning. And so I saw the importance of technical vocational education, and he probably would not have excelled in a traditional high school. I think there are a lot of tools at our disposal now for helping students to find their passion and what is of interest to them. I think of the My Plan curricula. I think of Naviance. I don't know if the high school here uses Naviance to, put together a 4-year plan and to make it methodical, and whether that's college or career, supporting students in what will serve them best.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor.
Mr. O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Buckey, what is the best strategy, in your opinion, for creating and retaining a diverse workforce in a school district?
I wish I had the answer to that. We were doing a program through the department last year, an 8-part series of attracting and retaining a diverse workforce. I think it's the conditions in your community. I think it's the support that you provide educators. Often educators from diverse backgrounds feel isolated, and how do you reduce that isolation? As a METCO district, if you are looking to have students or staff, a more diverse staff, they would be, if their experience here isn't positive, why would an educator or an administrator want to come here? And there is the reality that all districts are pursuing this as well. And, I believe education is windows and mirrors, that education should be a window into the lived experiences of other people, their background, sexual orientation, religion, ethnicity, and it should be mirrors so that they can see themselves in what we are teaching. And so if a student of color doesn't see any educators of color in the district, that's challenging. And so if I had an answer for how to solve that, I wish that I could give it, but I know we're all pursuing that in our diversity, equity, inclusion work.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep.
I'd like to talk a little bit about this being a CEO. So the superintendent is in essence the CEO of the school district. What key responsibilities do you see fall into that CEO role? And if you could please give an example, Dr. Buckey, of how you would prioritize them in Melrose.
I appreciate that. Last year, we had a school committee member who had to step down because her outside job was an ethics issue with being a school committee member in town. And so we brought on a school committee member to fill her term. It would have been up in the June election. And he, in every meeting, said, Buckey, you're the CEO for the district. You're the CEO. You need to lead from the front. Lead from the front. And so I learned a great deal from him in that, and I've said this several times today, the role of the superintendent as the CEO is to know the schools well in order to make the schools well-known. And the only way to know the schools well is to be out and engaged with them. And so that's a big part of who I am. And it's also building trust with the city, to have a relationship with the mayor. If you look at my references, the 2 town administrators I've worked with in Marblehead are references, the town manager from Nantucket, the police chief, the fire chief. I had an opportunity to speak to the library director here in Melrose, because the library director in Marblehead saw that I was a finalist here. And she said, let me put you in contact with the library director there. We had a wonderful conversation about her 22 years here in Melrose. Interestingly, as universes are parallel, you're doing a library renovation, and they're using one of the schools as a temporary in Marblehead. They're doing a library renovation and using one of our school buildings as a temporary library. So I think it's building trust in community as the CEO, making sure that people understand not only what you're doing, but why you're doing it. Sometimes in education, we take for granted the jargon that we use that is just generally known. Of course, everybody should know what MTSS is or Universal Design for Learning. But if you want people to support that, they need to understand what it is.
Thank you. Ms. McAndrew.
Thank you. Hello again. My question is about special education. And as you know very well, in Melrose and elsewhere, it's our great privilege to provide a free and appropriate public education for every student in the least restrictive environment. Sometimes we know that means placing a student outside of the district, either in a private school or collaborative, to meet their needs. For a lot of reasons, we'd love to keep as many students here in Melrose learning with their peers and neighbors. I'm interested in what experience do you have in building or expanding substantially separate programs within a district? And importantly, as that CEO role, what factors would you consider before doing so?
I think students are regular education students first, and then there are students who need additional supports and services through special education. It is always the goal to maintain students in district. I know that you have collaborated, lack of a better word, worked with SEAM to rent out space in the district for programs. I think if you can develop programs in-house, I think one of the issues, and I think I said this to Ms. Withy's question, space. Although we would like to build some programs, the space to do so. So are there ways of creating programs that might not be universal across different elementary school buildings, but serve a population of students, perhaps language-based learning, disabled students who often want to go to Landmark? Could you bring Landmark educators here? Could you develop programs in-house and provide the professional development for staff here that wouldn't necessitate an out-of-district placement? And I meet with the Director of Special Education weekly, and we monitor the out-of-district placements that we have. And we also look for opportunities where we can transition students back. Sometimes an out-of-district placement is needed for a short period of time, and looking at ways where if you have a number of students who are out for a similar placement, would it be better to create that program in-house or to hire educators with that background to serve those students so that they can remain in their district?
Thank you.
Ms. Withy.
Great, thank you. What does it mean for you to have a commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion? How have you demonstrated that commitment? And how would you see yourself demonstrating it here in Melrose?
I think DEI has gotten a bad rap somehow that acronym, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is a red flag for some. But I think at the end of the day, we're talking about belonging. And we want all of our students to feel as though they belong. And I shared this as I walked through your middle school today. I asked two young ladies, what's the best part of Melrose? And they said, the community. We feel important here. I mean, that's such a mic drop moment. And that may not be the lived reality for every student here, but the fact that you have students who feel that they are seen and heard and part of the community, how do you extrapolate that, the work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, to make sure that that is the response for all students? And we often say all means all, but it needs to be the lived reality and not just something that we say. And so I work closely with our METCO director, also meeting weekly, to see where we can enhance the program. I rode the METCO bus in and out with our students because we were one of the furthest districts. And to see a first grader get on a bus at 5:45 a.m. and immediately go to sleep, to then spend 6.5 hours in school to get back on a bus, I wanted to walk that walk. And for our METCO families to have a school committee meeting at METCO Inc. and to have a family dinner at METCO Inc. so that we can hear from them, because in some ways, Marblehead was not a welcoming community, and our METCO families did not feel part of that. And how can we address those concerns? Not just address them, but take action. Because there's nothing more frustrating than telling people you want to hear from them and then not take any action from what you've heard. And so I think we had a wonderful platform that we implemented last year called Thought Exchange. And it's an online platform that you pose a question to your community, and rather than a static survey where they can use a Likert scale and give you feedback that's just kind of stagnant, people can respond to a question, and then people can vote on that response or respond to, so it's a 5-star system. And if you say, what are our budget priorities this year? And somebody says, we need a new copier at the Hoover, that might get 1. And somebody would say, we need to stop charging athletic fees, and that might get 5. And then you take that data and you can, as superintendent, share that with the school committee on budget priorities, budget directives. Same thing with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Talk to families, talk to students, and it's a platform that can be used by students, families, the community. You can have people check how they're responding, and the data from that is invaluable. But asking students, what is the lived experience at Melrose High School for a student? And to take that, and if you have a statement saying, it's terrible, and everyone is voting 5 for that, you're going to want more information on that. And in Marblehead, they used it for school start times, to ask students about the start time, to ask faculty about the start times, to ask parents. And will they end up changing the school start times? I don't know, but they have an abundance of data about how the community, students, staff, and families feel.
Thank you. Mr. Salm.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask your thoughts on MCAS. By way of explanation and to provide a little bit of background, at the recent conference on the Cape for superintendents and school committee members, we heard from the Teacher of the Year who talked about how the MCAS does not actually ask questions that relate to skills and needs of everyday life. And from my own son, who complained that upon graduation, he still didn't know how to write a check. And so I would like to hear your thoughts about how as you mentioned, we have teachers that are feeling burning at both ends, candles are burning at both ends. How we balance teaching to state-required standards so that our 10th graders can pass said test and graduate, while at the same time teaching them life skills such that they can join society and have these basic skills at the ready.
Okay. First, congratulations on your recognition at that conference and for your work for the student, staff, and families of Melrose.
Thank you.
MCAS is a data point. I think the intentions for MCAS were to address what I would have said in Marblehead was a system of schools rather than a school system. And the education that you receive was contingent on the school you were assigned or the teacher that you got. I shared an anecdote today that a parent met with me and said, everybody knows that you don't want to get teacher X for the 3rd grade because she doesn't teach math. I'm like, what do you mean she doesn't teach math? And they said, every parent in Marblehead knows you would have to get a tutor because she doesn't like math. And so I think MCAS wanted to address that there were state standards and some assurance that teachers were following the standards with fidelity. I think over time, an emphasis, maybe through the media, maybe through the department at times, have put undue influence on what those results mean because they are a summative data point. I had a superintendent that called it autopsy data because the year was over and there's nothing that you can do with it. But I do think that using that data to inform instruction, if you see that there is a deficit in one of the standards at one of the grade levels, or if, as is the case with some of your MCAS data here, your subgroups are underperforming, how can you use that information to inform instruction for the teacher that was teaching, but also the teacher that is receiving? And cohort analysis with MCAS, I think, is valuable. Seeing student growth over time is valuable. But you have iReady here as a data system. Your MCAS data should not come as a surprise. I had a math department chair in Nantucket who had a PhD in computer science and would use MCAS data and could predict out for 3-5 years based on student performance how scores would come in. And so I think there is value, but I think Commissioner Riley, I've heard him speak several times of a more performance-based assessment, that you're doing something with the information rather than just regurgitating rote information. Do you know the Pythagorean theorem? Can you read and analyze a poem? But using a performance-based assessment. So I think there are positive things on the horizon. Initially, the mindset for MCAS was good, but the emphasis on it, on saying whether a school system is bad, whether instruction is good, I think is problematic.
Thank you.
Ms. Rosie Thomas.
Thank you so much. I am going to ask you a question about budgets. I was just looking up at the differences between Marblehead and Melrose. In Marblehead, you have a per pupil spending of $21,266. In Melrose, we have per pupil spending of $14,022. And you, in Marblehead, have 2,600 students roughly, and we have almost 4,000. So given that if you were to get this position, you'd be dealing with a lot more students with a lot fewer resources financially, and overrides take time and the will of the people. And how would you approach managing a structural deficit that's going to continue for some time?
Well, I would work.
And what's your experience with that?
Well, it is interesting that in Marblehead, with that per pupil expenditure, they too are going for an override. For They have level serviced their budget since 2007. They have not gone for an override. And so over time, not investing in technology, in facilities, in curriculum, catches up. And I think I saw that firsthand for COVID when in September of 2020, people were very angry that we weren't sending students back to school and live streaming classes for the students who needed to remain fully remote. The problem was we had not invested in technology. And so the back of the house was broken. The routers, the servers, the switches, the internet connectivity. So we could have purchased all the OWL cameras with ESSER funds till our hearts were content. They couldn't work. And so those things are cumulative and build over time. I think there are a number of things that go into a per pupil expenditure, not just the number of students that you have, the number of L students and special education students, and Student Opportunity Act was meant to mitigate some of that. I think the big cliff coming in budget preparation, I don't need to tell the mayor or the interim superintendent this, is that the ESSER funds are gone away. The ARPA funds, which the city was very generous here in providing 40% of the ARPA funds to support the purchase of curriculum materials, to help balance the budget. We're going to have to be creative moving forward and make the case for what is needed to educate a Melrose student. And that will likely be an override.
Thank you.
Mayor Broder.
We don't have much time left. I have two questions I want to ask, so I'm going to ask them both, and you can pick one.
I love it.
All right. You've worked in towns your entire career.
Yes, sir.
I have, former life represented a city and a town, so I get the flavor, I think, of what's different. And I'll tell you, it's very different. Dealing with one person as opposed to a select board or FinCom or whatever the case may be, and recognizing that, the mayor has the same issues that the schools do, except across all departments, right? Level service versus level funding means the same thing for the police department in many respects as it does for the district. So how do you navigate that relationship? Or you can take behind what's door number two. And I want to hear about, I know you had an opportunity to meet with 6 or so high school kids. I think all the finalists did. Parenthetically, I'm a little disappointed the middle school kids didn't say the best thing about Melrose is the mayor, but that's life. Tell me about that meeting, what you saw in the kids and what you got out of it.
Yeah. Probably the best part of my day, not that this isn't tremendously enjoyable. But the students were, I asked first how they were selected, and they said that they had gotten an email from the principal, and there were students who are seniors, there are students who are juniors, and a couple 10th graders. Somehow the freshmen did not make the cut, but they were involved in athletics and the arts, and were talking about their experiences and what they like about Melrose, and very poignant questions about the superintendent and how I would get to know students and what changes I would like to make. So that was an enjoyable part of my day. And I'll go for the double. I'll answer both questions. I think for me, education is about relationships and spending time getting to know the incoming mayor, getting to know the CFO, getting to know the police chief, the fire chief, the library director. I'm assuming there are cabinet meetings of city officials, and helping to make the case for the schools and what we need, but also being a good partner in city government and recognizing that public safety facilities need to be renovated. So congratulations on that vote in November. and there will likely come a time when school facilities need to be built or renovated or expanded. And so being a good partner in city government, I think, will be something I strive to do.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under the heading of teaching and learning, and maybe some planning too, what are the kinds of things that you would want our current kindergartners to know 12 years from now?
Oh, that is exactly an exercise that we did in framing a portrait of a graduate on the island, is asking our kindergarten teachers, first and second, at the end of 12 years of a Nantucket Public Schools education, what would you hope for our students? And I think that, there are content standards that you want them to know, how to write a check. I instituted a graduation requirement of personal finance for that exact reason. But we're educating students for jobs that may not yet exist. And in a world of artificial intelligence and that technology taking off, you'll want students to have those skills of being able to collaborate, to be able to communicate, to work together in a team, to have problem-solving skills. I have said several times today, I think as a nation, as schools, we have turned from seeing it as a problem to be solved into a battle to be won or a game to be played. And in those two, there are winners and losers. And I think that we miss the opportunity to solve problems when we approach it as something to be won or lost.
Thank you.
Thank you all. At this time, I would invite you to provide some closing comments, please.
Thank you. I would just reiterate my appreciation for the opportunity to interview. I have very much enjoyed my day in the district. I was telling Ms. Withy and Mr. O'Connell how impressed I was with the screening committee, because as a candidate, you come in and look around to see who has gotten a seat at the table, who the stakeholders are that are interviewing, and then just the depth of questions. It was very clear that there was a significant amount of time and effort, and I think you both are knocking on the door of 8, 9, 10 nights at this, so I'm very appreciative of that. I'm going to quote Mayor Broder twice, since you did 2 questions. The first you've heard me say is that I heard him say that when you ask somebody who works in Melrose, what do you do? They don't say, I work in the clerk's office, or I'm a fireman, or I'm a policeman. They say, I serve the people of Melrose. I would like to count myself among those that hopes to be able to say, I serve the people of Melrose. And the second thing was a quote that he said he shares, and that's, there's no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. It is clear as a candidate for superintendent of schools here that your community cares deeply about education. There are challenges ahead, let's call them opportunities ahead, but the power for change is here. And again, I would count it my privilege to serve as your superintendent of schools. And I would be remiss not to end with this, because as I was touring the Winthrop today, Braden and Owen said, I hope you win. I do too. So thank you for the opportunity to interview for your superintendent of schools position.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Buckey. And we will be certainly in touch once the committee reaches our decision. We do invite the community to share thoughts and questions and comments and feedback with all of us. We will be putting out a survey sometime tomorrow, and would be delighted to hear from the community relative to that. With that, after I mentioned that, again, all of our community meet and greets and our interviews with the school committee have been recorded, and those will be produced apparently tomorrow, is what I hear from our friends at MMTV, so look for those. And with that, I would entertain a motion for adjournment. Mayor Broder made the second by Ms. Rozzy Thomas, and seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? That motion carries unanimously, and we are adjourned.